On a small farm in Kentucky, Edgar Harrell heard about the war in the Pacific on the radio. After listening to reports of Marines losing their lives, he wanted to help.
I thought, you know, I'm 18 years old and I'd already registered for the draft, and I thought, now I don't want to wait and be drafted. I want to get in the Marine Corps.
The heavy cruiser, the USS Indianapolis, became his home.
When I saw that big Indianapolis, you know, you can imagine the country boy what he thought of that.
Harrell saw fierce combat on the ship, events that shook him to the core. The 91-year-old vividly recalls one harrowing incident when a Japanese kamikaze plane struck the Indianapolis in the battle for Okinawa.
I can remember seeing that plane thinking that life is over. This is the end of life, because he's diving for the fantail.
Harrell survived that attack, but 9 of his shipmates did not. The Indianapolis had to return to the States for repairs. Eventually, it left San Francisco Bay, heading back to the South Pacific on what would be its final mission. On board, important components of the atomic bombs that would be dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Crew members unloaded the war-ending cargo at Tinian Island. Harrell says their next assignment was to head to the Philippines to prepare for the main invasion of Japan.
Captain McVeigh asked for an escort, and they tell him, you don't need an escort. Well, may I say, they were not telling the truth. They could have said, you need an escort. Why? Because 4 days before, we lost a destroyer, the USS Underhill. We lost 129 boys. And we were to go through that very area.
Why Navy leaders made that decision, Harrell says, remains a mystery. And that brings us to July 30th, 1945. A Japanese submarine spots the Indianapolis in the Philippine Sea and fires a spread of torpedoes. 2 hit their mark, and in less than 15 minutes, the ship goes down. Around 900 of the nearly 1,200-man crew who survived the initial attack find themselves oil-soaked, many with injuries, clinging to Kapok life jackets in the shark-infested waters.
And I thought of Mom and Dad back home. I thought of 6 younger brothers, an older sister and a younger sister, and I thought of this certain brunette that said that she would wait for me. And I told the Lord, I don't want to die, I want to live.
Harrell, who was 20 at the time, says he began to think of scriptures.
I'll never leave you nor forsake you. Seemingly that came to mind, no audible voice, but I knew that the Lord was speaking to me. Lord, you're speaking to my heart. I'm going to make it. Well, I didn't know I'm going to be out there 4.5 days.
4.5 days of unbelievable horror. No food, no water, and yet surrounded by water in all directions, along with sharks. He says shipmates not in their right mind, some because they were injured, others because they drank salt water, began to hallucinate.
He leaves the group and he gets out 50, 75 yards, and you hear a blood-curdling scream, and you see that kapok go under, and then like a fish cork, then that kapok brings that body back up. But by now, all the blood and more sharks, more fins, and they are kind of fighting over what was there.
Despite witnessing scenes like that, Harrell refused to give up hope. He believes God directed him and several of his buddies to a crate of rotten potatoes. The hearts of the potatoes were still edible. He also believes God sent a small rain cloud one day to provide desperately needed water.
So what do? Thank you, Lord. Thank you, Lord. Thank you. And that little rain cloud comes over, and you get a few drops of, maybe a few tablespoons full of water.
The brutal conditions took their toll. The number of sailors and Marines dwindled down to a little more than 300. Finally, a plane flew over the area low to the water. A miracle, because the pilot, Lieutenant Wilbur Gwynn, wasn't looking for the survivors. He did not even know they were missing. No one did.
Lieutenant Gwynn goes aft, he opens the bomb bay door, and in just a flash, he looks down at the ocean below, and what he saw was an oil slick.
Flying even lower, Gwynn, who they called Angel, sees debris, sharks, and sharks attacking survivors. He radios for help, and eventually 317 crew members of the USS Indianapolis are pulled from the water. Harold spent months in hospitals recovering. After everything Harold went through, it's easy to see why he's a decorated Marine. He was even awarded the Purple Heart. Here is the letter dated August 13, 1945. The Purple Heart is awarded by the medical officer in command to Edgar Alvin Harrell for wounds received in action against an enemy of the United States on July 30th, 1945. He went on to marry Ola, the brunette who waited for him. Harold shares his story of God's providence at schools and churches. He calls it a ministry. He and his son David also chronicled the unforgettable story in a new book, Out of the Depths.
There's not a day that goes by, many times a day, I just look up and say, thank you, Lord.
Mark Martin, CBN News, Clarksville, Tennessee.